all the members. We'd like to welcome joined us this morning. In this week, we are on SA National Marriage Week, and it kicks off officially today. We, however, started it yesterday. The idea being to say, let us give ourselves enough time. Let us give ourselves the platform to actually engage from different walks of life, engage with the understanding a bit of the legal aspect of marriage, engage with the understanding a bit of the traditional cultural aspect of marriage, and yes, engage with the wishes that we each bring into the marriage. So yesterday, Dedis Buse took us through what is it that we need to do. And with the audience and the guests that were there, they discussed the fundamental issues and fundamental aspects that needs to be looked at when you are preparing to get married. So the journey continues. We're saying yesterday we spoke about you preparing to get married and all the emotions that come in there, all the facts that come in there, all the illusions that we bring into that. But now today we're saying, now you've decided, you know what, this young man, this young woman, is the person I want to be with for the rest of my life. So when that happens, then you need to then start going into that process of saying, okay, I want to bring this person to be one with me. I think the idea of marriage differs from one person to the next. I think we're not really here to say we want to validate why marriage is still required. We're not necessarily here to say we want to, unpack whether marriage should be happening this way or that way. But we are here to say, let us share. Let us share the understanding of what marriage is. Let us share the understanding of when you get into this marriage, what is it that happens normally? What is it that we find as challenges? What is it that we find as afterthoughts? Because we are human beings. Sometimes you have a bit of afterthoughts before you even get into the marriage. Today I'm being joined by Dedi Kagiso. Dedi Kagiso, please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. Kagiso, Eddie Kagiso, better known as. Thank you, that's in the picture for hosting this lovely topic. It's a very controversial topic at some point, so we like to maybe just get clarity or clarify some of the issues that we see couples and families go through these days. So it's going to be an interesting one. Thank you, Dennis, for allowing me to join, be part of the guests. Thank you.
Absolutely. Exciting. Now I'm looking at Dedi Loazi and I'm saying, this guy, he's going to be wearing a bit of a legal hat this morning. Dedi Loazi, you're welcome. And let's let our viewers hear from you.
Thank you again, Daddy's in the picture, for inviting me this morning. Indeed, as Daddy Kagiso said, this topic needs a lot of discussion. In fact, it needs a lot of information sharing. There are lots of assumptions that are made, and unfortunately, some of these assumptions are not correct in law. And I think this discussion comes at a very good time to set the record straight, as it were, and to also inform our dads what is the position in law regarding customary marriages and what to do and what not to do. So a very, very pertinent topic, and I thank you, Des in the picture, for inviting me this morning.
Awesome, thank you. That is awesome. Just on a kickoff, as a kickoff, Dedi Loazi, what would your short, to the point definition of marriage be?
Marriage in terms of, well, you can get actually different types of marriages. There's civil marriages and there's customary marriages and what we used to term traditional marriages, which could also be religious marriages as well. So a marriage in customary law and in civil law is marriage between two people regarded as spouses, who come together in terms of the regulations and the requirements of the Act to constitute a marriage and get into a contract to marry and live their lives together, whether they choose to share their assets or estates or the way that they choose to separate them. It will depend on which marital property regime they choose. But ostensibly, marriage is a contract, and is a contract that must be gotten into formally between people who are aware of what they are doing and are aware of the consequences of that marriage. Yeah, that's in short.
Awesome, awesome. I like that. I like the way you put it nicely. It's you have to look at the different aspects of it. You have to look at the different the needs that come onto that. Now, Dedi Kagiso, often we hear about marriage and then we hear about a wedding. What would you say a wedding then is? Because for some who don't understand, there's a huge difference between the two.
Yeah, so basically, as part of entering into a marriage, you would have a wedding ceremony. So a wedding ceremony is a traditional celebration in a way to celebrate the union. In the Western way or in the civil way, you would just have a wedding where a preacher comes in and obviously officiates that particular wedding. However, in the traditional sense of things, a wedding is celebrated and entered into from a customary manner to say we are joining the two and we're sharing gifts. We letting the families actually interact and know each other, because obviously you might come from different provinces, different areas, but you would then say the families of Kambule, the families of Tema would come in and know each other, and that. So it's a traditional way in which we celebrate a union and making sure that we also introduce the ancestors as well in a traditional sense of things, where we slaughter a live animal depending on what your custom is. So yeah, so those are the main two in South Africa that we actually celebrate. It's your civil wedding or your traditional wedding, where there is also the meeting of the ancestors.
Okay, while I still have you, Dedi Kagiso, would you say there is specific reasons or obvious reasons for people to get into marriage? So basically getting into the institution of marriage, just so that we sort of are on the same level and the same page with everybody else. I mean, we've got different cultures and different traditions. But when you get into the institution of marriage, why are you getting in there?
Yeah. Look, I mean, traditionally so, and I think it still applies when two people want to enter into a marriage, to say we're officiating it, and we are entering into this contract. The understanding when the couple comes together is the fact that these two couples are saying that they want to spend the rest of their lives together. To say that they will die in the institution, hence you enter into the marriage, because obviously you might in today's terms we have partners, boyfriend, girlfriends, you have life partners, but immediately when you're saying that we're moving into marriage, it's a lifelong commitment, and that is understood in that particular way. That is why when you dissolve a marriage, you then have to follow a very formal process to dissolving a particular marriage, because you are breaking the oath. So therefore, the courts of the land needs to come in and institute the dissolvement of that particular marriage. So, and it's not intended to be dissolved. It's intended when you enter into it, your intent is to die and into that in that institution, at your timely death. So obviously you want to live the rest of your life with someone that you love, that you care for, that you appreciate and willing to take care of, and all those particular things. Yeah. So that institutes a lot of people to say, because I love you, because I want to take care of you, then I want to spend the rest of my life with you.
Very,
Yeah.
very interesting that you put it that way. You know, it's at times we hear about people getting married, and sometimes you're fortunate to be close enough to the person who's getting married for them to actually say, you know what, this is the plan, and you can actually have some casual talks about it, and then sometimes you just get an invitation that says, here's a invitation for my wedding that's coming at such and such a point. What are the things that would normally go through your mind, Teddy Luazi, when a friend of yours, somebody close to you, actually says, I'm getting married? What are the first two or three things that come to mind?
The first thing I would ask them is that, do you know what you're getting yourself into? A lot of people don't consider that. But, and I guess this question becomes very important, especially in dealing with largely Black traditional or religious families. When you get married, there are two ways, or there are different ways to get married. You can get married according to civil law, or you can get married according to customary law or religious law. And they need to choose which avenue they're going to take, because depending on each one, they have different consequences to that. So you tend to find a lot in regards to Black people getting married is that they have what they call a customary marriage, and they also afterwards have registered their marriage as a civil union. And one would sometimes think that because you registered a civil union after your customary marriage, it invalidates your customary marriage, or your civil union takes precedence over that. And the law recently has changed. If the two of you continue to register a civil marriage after your customary marriage is still valid. However, if you're married according to customary law, and that means following your customs and your tradition of both the spouse and of both the spouses, you then can, in some customs, as a man, take on a second wife or a third wife. That meaning engaging in multiple marriages. But if you've taken the civil marriage, you can't have subsequent other wives thereafter, and therefore you must understand that. And also, if you've taken multiple customary marriages, you can't then take a civil marriage. The law recently changed in terms of the act and the judgment that was made in 2020 that if you're married according to customary marriage to one person, and then you want to then pursue a civil marriage with a second person, it doesn't invalidate the first customary marriage, and the rights of that wife will still persist. And so, therefore, you need to understand that you're getting into a contract. And what does this contract mean? The contract means that you're getting into a union that's going to affect how you relate as people, because if you're married in community or property, you essentially become one. And if you separate your properties with an agreement, an AntiNatural Contract, you can separate your properties. But the effects through that, especially if you don't have a will at the time of passing, that can affect the rights and of the surviving spouse or those who will benefit from your estate thereafter. So it's quite important. The first question I ask is, do you know what you're doing? And getting yourself into. Secondly, what course are you wanting to take? Are you going to have a traditional marriage? Are you going to have a civil union? Are you going to have a civil marriage? So that you understand who to go to. And most importantly, it is always wise and better to register your marriage, whether it's customary or whether it's civil. You must register it, because then it takes away the confusion later when you want to establish whether or not you're married. A lot of people in custom, like in Nguni custom, you understand that if you have paid lobola, and due to a recent judgment about the bridal exchange being deemed to be unconstitutional, normally you would understand that you'd go through the process of paying lobola, you would have a bridal exchange and celebrations. And now they're saying, now the courts have taken the position that the bridal exchange is not actually necessary and not an essential part of the marriage. And therefore, that process might fall away. And you tend to find in other customs that lobola itself is not fully paid in the Nguni custom, but in Tswana customs and stuff, you'll tend to find that the position is that lobola must be paid first before you have celebrations thereafter. So you need to understand what culture or custom you're going to follow if you're going to do a customary marriage in the first place. Second of all, you need to understand what the consequences will be there. And it is always wise to register it. If you're unsure and have been married for some time, you can approach the High Court for a declaratory order, either to confirm your marriage or to establish that, in fact, you were not married, and because you didn't follow the customs and the traditions according to your customs of the spouse or the husband, of the spouses. And finally, the dissolution of any marriage must be through the formal process of going through the court and to declare the marriage through divorce, not to declare to divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences or retrievable breakdown of the marriage. I beg your pardon. And so it's important to understand that you are entering into an institution, and it's important to understand the direction you want to take. If you're a person that is open to having multiple wives and you've agreed that with your wife, there's an avenue to pursue that. If you're a person that intends to marry one woman, there's an avenue to pursue that. The recent amendment to the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, Amendment of 2021, says that the position now, which was different before, of people who got married before the coming onto the act, has now the effect of making the same consequences of people who are married after the act. The position before was that if you are married before that coming into effect of the act in 1998, you did not then have the benefit of the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act because it did not act retrospectively. Now, the amendment has amended Section 7, Section 1, and Section 3, and those amendments, in fact, give rights to people who are married before they come into the act, coming into the act of the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, in respect of their share in the property, on the property of the husband, in respect of the rights of the house that they live in, and in being able to participate as well in the dissolution or the distribution of assets, either upon the end of marriage or deceased of the spouse of the husband. So we must understand that the law is developing very quickly in attributing equal rights, both to men and women, in a marriage. And it is very wise to be informed of what you both intend to do in the marriage and post the marriage, and what decision you want to take. Because if you're a person that wants to have multiple wives, although the act allows you in custom, but in civil union, it doesn't give you that. And therefore, always be aware. And it's always advisable as friends and as colleagues to interrogate our friend who wants to get married as to whether they are aware of what they are doing and whether they understand what they are doing, so that later down the road, they don't fall into the trap of saying that they've gotten into something that they can't handle or they don't understand.
Teddy, still sticking with you on that one. I love the fact that you're saying as friends, let's interrogate our friends. But now I'm looking at it now, because we are in it. The laws are changing. So, we might not be that quick on the uptake. Now, let's look at you as a dad, and you say you are raising a daughter, you are raising a son, who they've already given that indication that they will want to get married one day. They shouldn't be waiting for their peer or for their friend, or even for you to actually give them this information at the time that they get married. So what would you say that needs to be handled? How would that need to be handled?
I think as parents, we play a very, very important role. And the importance of our role is to always, because in customary law, as parents, as elders, we participate in the process. And therefore, the important thing is to always take the position of informing your child, whether it's a daughter or it's your son, about custom, one, the custom that you are part of. Secondly, understanding what are the processes of customary law. And where a lot of people fail is that when they begin the process through lobola negotiations, for instance, they don't write down the resolutions or the agreements of the lobola negotiations. And because they don't do that, going forward, if there's a dispute, it becomes very difficult to prove. Second of all, you must inform your son or your daughter that these are the obligations and the processes one must follow if they're going to get married according to our custom. You must understand that the law is not very specific. The Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, very specific, and doesn't offer a uniform standard for all customary marriages, but rather says it is specific to your custom. So the Nguni custom is different to the Tswana and the Pedi custom. And therefore, an interpretation must be made according to your custom. And therefore, also, in places where you don't have recognized traditional leaders, for instance, in the Western Cape, there isn't a recognized traditional leaders. A question that I've had before is whether now, if there isn't a recognized traditional leader in the Western Cape, and I want to register my customary marriage, how do I do so when there isn't a leader, a traditional leader here? And in a recent judgment, the courts have said that you can actually approach the court for that, or when you can go and register your customary marriage. You don't need a specific traditional leader, and a traditional leader must be one, by the way, that is authenticated by law and has been put in that position legally. So a person can't come and say, because we are the dominant family in a particular community, I'm a traditional leader. If you're not
So what if I'm a
recognized
descendant?
by relevant law.
What if I'm a descendant of a chief from the family of chiefs?
All chiefs and traditional leaders are recognized in law and must be registered duly. So that you would need to do, and that's why I say that the importance is to also always ensure that you register your marriage, whichever type of marriage you have. You must register it, because it will help in providing clarity going forward. You know, women and men sometimes get married and they think that because I haven't gone to register it, we can break up. You wake up and you fight and you decide, you know what, we've broken up like you've broken up with a girlfriend. Yeah, aujoli. Mauso would say you've gone through custom, aujoli. You need to go and end that marriage formally. Because the problem here is then the other spouse going forward can come back to you and say, I've been married to this person. Yes. And therefore I have rights and my marriage was never dissolved.
Yes.
And therefore you'll find the situation, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yes.
And you never went through the process of formal divorce. A person can come and either claim your estate, claim the property, claim maintenance even, because your marriage still subsists and persists. So it's important to inform your children, men or your daughters and women, to be aware, and to in fact inform your uncles, because a lot of people get represented by uncles in custom when they're doing lobola and they're going through the processes, are informed by the elders. So if the elders are not aware of the change in laws and the things and the rights that are now given in law, they may insist on things that have evolved. And so the problem is the information needs to reverberate throughout everyone. And everybody needs to be informed of what you need to do. And then I think that's a position that unfortunately we haven't taken, and unfortunately is landing quite a few people in trouble today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dedi. Dedi Kagiso, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, just to add, you know, the bigger problem that we sit with is the fact that a lot of our customary law is not written, right? So now the question begs is to say, what then constitutes or validates a marriage? So the Act now gives us a clear guideline, but the guideline is not too clear and it's got a lot of loopholes, right? To say I mean, they'll give us the three to say the parties must be above 18, which is all good. The parties must consent to enter into a customary under customary law. So now, that part for me, when they say consent, the problem I have or the issue I have is that as a black person, you might not have the intention to marry under customary law, right? Your intention might to say, I want to sign in community of property or out of community of property, whatever regime civilly that you want to sign. So now the issue then becomes to say, there is this process of the lobola negotiations that is like in a way mandatory for us to enter into, right? Because the other point that it says the marriage must be negotiated and celebrated in accordance to customary law. So we go and negotiate this particular lobola. What does that mean? Does it mean, so if, for an example, we say the lobola is 30,000, and we all agree to say, okay, I'll put 30,000, and then I put in 1,000 here. Does that mean my marriage is valid or not? When they talk about celebration, again, they don't go into detail to say what type of celebration are we talking about. So someone will say, no, but we had lunch, and that was a celebration, right? So those things are things that currently are in the main when couples now notice to say, yeah, well, you know, I just paid lobola for her, but I never finished. We never celebrated. We never did this. Then someone comes and says, no, but we did celebrate. We had a lunch. We literally we agreed to say this is the amount that we're going to pay and so forth. So as Dedi Loazi says, is that I was in my 20s when this happened, right? Strictly according to the law. Now I'm in my 40s. I'm married to somebody, that marriage or that thing I did not finish in my 20s. That lady or that guy can come back and say, me and this guy are married, and according to the law, I'm the only one that is recognized because your current marriage is not recognized. It's null and void. So that's what the Act says. It says if you've entered into a marriage, you cannot enter into another one. And there is case law currently that speaks to that, that says, you know, someone has passed on and so forth, where the first wife who was lobolad and they broke up a long time ago, and then comes back and says, but I'm the wife or I'm the husband. And by virtue of the fact that customary law says you are in community of property. You understand? Automatically, there's no you choose. No, you are in community of property. So now it begs to say, what then happens if 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you did not dissolve that particular marriage? It means that there's a lot of people who are in that situation that you say, no, but I never finished. In your mind, you think that your marriage is not, it was not valid, which in actual fact, it could be. And then now it invalidates your current marriage.
So,
now,
I'm hearing you, Didi. Now I'm saying, are we getting married perhaps as young people? Like you're saying 20 years ago you were young. Isn't that why, as Dedilo, as you were saying, that you would have then Abu Malume being part of that? Because they are the ones who are supposed to be sort of the moral compass into these things. They are the ones who are supposed to be the ones that actually say, okay, now that you're going to go and pay this and negotiate this and end up with 30 and pay the 1,000. That 1,000, remember, we went there with the intention to marry. So that 1,000 actually constitutes you fulfilling that intention and following it up and confirming it. Now, what then happens is 20 years later, you meet somebody else. That one you never even stayed with, it's history, right? So you meet somebody else and you feel like, now, if you go and you say, I'm going to lobola this person, this is you being honest, then you need to be going to almost the same team that you used previously. Unless somewhere, right? And they are the ones who should go and say something, Lwazi.
Yes, it's very important, and I think you tend to find these days, when you break down the fabric of family, you tend to find in this day and age that the younger children are growing up, making a lot more money, becoming dominant in a marriage, I mean, in a family setting. They tend to direct what happens in the family, and things happen in the way that they want because they're able to support, or they're the breadwinners in the family, or they support and they direct things. And in that way, you'll find that there becomes a lot of influence down up instead of top down. And that can create a problem, especially because we are growing up in a time where we may not have the proper understanding of what culture is and what culture is supposed to be in its authenticity. And we are adding on what we think it should be because of the world we are now living in.
Absolutely.
So if a parent can be strong enough to say to his child, but remember, 10 years ago, you sent us to this woman's family to be married. You then went and paid lobola in this marriage. You cannot now go to somebody else and say you want to start that without having concluded that part. That is the honesty that we seek. And unfortunately, you'll tend to find that some young men and some young women will be saying, "But why are you saying that I can do what I want? We broke up." And that sometimes is one of the aspects, not all of it, but one of the aspects. Second of all, my advice is always that although the consequences or the natural consequences of a customary marriage is that you're married in community property, you have within the 3 months after concluding or registering your marriage to change the matrimonial property regime lawfully through making an application to court, to the High Court, to change that. And we must inform our children of that, because that's what the Act allows. When the question of only paying lobola constitutes marriage, you must understand lobola is one of the requirements of a valid marriage. And in terms of Section 31B of the recognition of customary marriages, that it recognizes that lobola is one of the aspects in this journey. And therefore, it's important, if you want to rely on your custom or your tradition for concluding a marriage, you must understand what that custom and tradition is. And therefore, the role of traditional leaders becomes also very important. Absolutely. Because they are seen to be the custodians of that culture. And they are the ones who would become, if you would call it, expert witnesses on that. Because they're the ones who would be able to say, this is our custom here, this is our tradition here, and this is how we do things here. So that we don't get into the trap of interpreting what custom is for ourselves.
I think I agree with you. However, as a movement that's in the picture, we've been facing this question of absent fathers. And those absent fathers extends to absent uncles and absent grandfathers. And as such, the young ones are left to do their own thing. And because, as you correctly mentioned, they now have the financial muscle and are sort of listened to over protocol and tradition. Dedi Kagiso, you touched on a few things earlier, and I'm thinking to myself now that, if we go and we say, two people getting married, and there's an issue of not completing the journey, as Dedilu, as you were saying, there are different aspects. Lobola is just one of them. How then would you advise somebody who is looking to get married, as far as tradition or as far as customary law is concerned? What would then be the right process to follow in making sure that the customary marriage is complete?
Yeah, thank you, Daddy. So, as Daddy Lwazi and you alluded to the facts that when you entering into the marriage, right, the couple, they need to then have a discussion to say how and what type of contract are we entering into, right? So what the mood of the country at the moment is saying, and based on the laws and the judgments that have come, it says that before you go into negotiations, you must firstly address that issue to say, if you are going, let's say in a case civil, or you are saying we're going out of community property with accrual, or out of community property without accrual, you then need to first make sure that you go see a lawyer, make sure that you have a contract between you and your spouse to say this is going to be the marriage regime that happens. It shouldn't happen after the fact, even though it can happen in some instances, but it says that it is safer to actually do it prior to the negotiations. Now, coming to your question, is that the way we practice our custom? No, because that will be seen as disrespect in our culture to say, how do you then go marry yourself and have these contracts without the negotiations? So that's where now it becomes a little bit problematic in terms of from the customary point of view, because from a customary point of view, everything starts with the lobola negotiations. Then we do our lobola negotiations, and then only then the other processes begin to say celebration, traditional celebration, and end. However, then we get a situation where you've concluded your customary marriage by making sure that you've paid your lobola, your marriage is registered, or not necessarily registered. So you've paid the lobola, you've gone through the lobola process. After that, by law, strictly looking at the law, you are married. You are married under customary law. But your intention is not to marry under customary law. Your intention is to marry under the civil law. Then what then tends to happen is that we then go and have another wedding called a white wedding. And then only after that do we then approach the marriage, home affairs and so forth, to then go and register our civil law and so forth. Now, what tends to happen currently is that is seen to be marrying twice. Because you were married, you concluded this part, you celebrated it traditionally, you are married. So now you've gone again to marry again, civilly. So now the question is, which marriage is valid? Is it the traditional? Or
from my understanding from the Dilwazi, if the civil marriage that happens afterwards is to the same person that you lobolat and completed marrying in tradition, then there's no issues there. Nothing is nullifying any other except for the issue of the contract. Dilwazi, would you want to wrap it up in a minute?
Yes, no. That is the position. So if you continue to register a civil marriage to the same person that you completed customary processes and requirements with, there is no issue. The only issue would arise later. I would also advise, as Dad Kagiso was saying, that the anti-natural contract, you must understand, when you register your marriage, you submit in your part of your registration documents your anti-natural contract, if you have one. So that's at a stage of submitting it to Home Affairs or registering it within the court, and the marriage officer who concludes. So a marriage officer can be a traditional leader, and a marriage officer can be a religious leader appointed, or the marriage officer can be a person appointed in terms of Home Affairs, who's got that authority to conclude the marriage for yourselves. So it's important that you understand where the formal processes begin and the legal processes begin. When you want to negotiate, you have the negotiations, you conclude the negotiations, and the negotiations are simply to establish the intentions and how those families will be coming together and going forward. And those must be detailed in that lobola negotiation or agreement that comes from those negotiations. And then the further step going forward is that Now you want to enter a marriage. So because you want to enter a marriage, you must go through the processes in customary law, and amongst those, you must put in your antinuptial contract in the registration process. And it's important to discuss that not between the families per se, but between yourselves, because that's what's going to regulate your marriage directly. And perhaps we're not practicing that, because what you must understand that we, especially since the Constitution was enacted in 1996, the jurisprudence or the law of our country has changed quite a bit in recognizing the rights in the Bill of Rights. And because of that, if you are a 40-year-old man or 35-plus-year-old man, or even a 30-plus-old man, you are experiencing a change of law, but having the people who negotiate on your behalf being in their 60s and 70s in some instances, who understood law before the rights were given to both couples or rights were given to women. And this is important to understand, because you are caught in the middle. If you don't inform and you don't share the knowledge like we are doing now, you tend to find yourself caught between a rock and a hard place, because you would understand differently how the law operates from what your uncles would have told you back then and to what we know now to be the law. So we need to practice things more differently and position ourselves differently, because we must understand that the Bill of Rights recognizes equality and equality for all. That has changed the traditional view of marriage, and this is what we need to understand.
Yeah, Daddy, I'm happy with that. And just before Daddy Kagiso comes in, I'd like to acknowledge some of the comments we're getting. Mami Ayanda saying that we need to understand the marital contracts in place when entering into marriage, and we always need to register a marriage. Obviously, the conversation we're having, we're talking about making sure that when you actually, even before you go and you say, I'm getting married, you've had the conversation with the individual. But now where I want to sort of steer the next line of conversation is that I am Mishek, right? I am Tsonga. I'm coming from Hammanskraal. I've got a Tsonga sort of culture, customs as well. And I'm marrying somebody who's coming from the Northwest, who's Tswana, who's got different customs and even the culture, by culture looking at the way of living. So between the two, is it important to understand where this person comes from so that you actually move together in the right direction, have the conversations in faith, and not end up with conflict when you start bringing the issue of contracts to the table? Daddy Kagiso?
Yeah, look, as I stated earlier, to say that the marriage to be validated must be entered into in accordance with customary law. The challenge that we face is that customary law, as I stated, that it's unwritten. So it does not define, whereas back in the day, it would have been clear to say we are following the men's culture or the women's culture or something. So at least there would be an understanding of that level. So at the moment, as we're sitting, it is unclear and undocumented that whose culture are we following. So when I'm going as a petty man, entering into negotiations to a Tsonga lady, the question is, whose culture are we following? So those are the things that are unwritten. So what they've done, the lawmakers, if I look at them, is that they try to make customary law as if it applies to everybody the same, or everybody has the same customs. And that is not actually the reality on the floor. We don't have the same customs. We don't have the same traditions. Pedis do slightly different to Tongas, to other ethnic groups. So therein is the conflict. When we're trying to validate our marriage, one will say, according to my culture, where is the culture written? Where is it practiced? And then the other one learner will say, no, but according to my culture, I don't have to finish 1, 2, 3. I don't have to bring the bride this side, and so forth and so forth. So those are the things that at the moment are being challenged. Hence, we are advising to say, make sure that you whatever decisions that you've done, you register it so that it's clear. But the problem comes in, the Dimish, is that, as you know, you've paid a handsome amount for this lobola. Now you broke again. So you paid lobola, you are broke. You've concluded. Then you are saying, hey, we're gonna wait for our wedding. You haven't signed, you haven't done anything. In 2 years down, that's what we do, isn't it? Now the question becomes, in that 2 years, in that 3 years, what is happening? Are you married or not? A lot of the people in today, they are not married, right? So now, then a separation will happen in that period, then people forget. So those are the things that, if something happens to that union at that particular time, you need to dissolve it with the High Court. You need to dissolve it and say, we are divorcing. And by virtue of the fact that even though your intention was to marry out of community of property, because you had not done the wedding and so forth, you are in community of property at that point. You share all, you are in joint estate, and it will be dissolved according to in community of property, right? And so those are the things that we are saying, that before you go into, make sure that you understand each other, whatever the custom that you are, Tsonga, Pedi, what, the customary law is seen as the same. It's seen, they're applying it as if they're all one. You understand? Because you're not going to argue when you go to court to say, according to Tsongas, we do this. And then the other person says, according to this. No, they'll say, was it negotiated? Yes, it was negotiated. Did you agree? Did you consent to these negotiations? Was there a celebration of some sort? Okay, we had a lunch. Someone will say we had a lunch, and that will be enough to convince the court to say a marriage was concluded, and so forth.
Yeah, Kunzima. There is who saying, if the law is this complicated around marriage, does it make the marriage themselves even more complicated? I mean, it goes without saying. Now, here's the question for you, Dedi Luazi. I've got this theory, right? In adding to what Dedi Kagiso was saying, if two people have gone all the way and actually lobolad and celebrated, but because of the structure of the customary marriage, they might not have, as per your advice, done the paperwork to say, this is the blueprint for our marriage, right? Because they were chacharach for whatever reason, right? Now comes a time where, for instance, they separate, right? Would you say that we need the maturity to actually have a separation document, so to put it, separation position, so to put it, separation basically to say, yes, I stormed out of the house last week, but I need to set up a meeting within the month to say, you know what, because we're no longer together in this case, in case we are going to go in this particular direction, Amajit, I've seen them do, you are paying rental, you move out, you actually automatically start paying another rental, and you expect her to pay the rental in the place that she can't afford. So it already costs. But what would you advise Dedi Luazi to say, separated people who were married under customary law that they hadn't registered, what would be the first point of action for those two people? Because separation can last a week, a month, 10 years. You are on mute, Dedi. Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I was saying, can you hear me now? I was saying, yeah, that's a very important point that you put, because it's a matter that was dealt with recently in the last 2 years. I don't know if many of you know former singer Double HP and his marriage to Lerato. That was an issue there. So the position of the law is, even if you have not registered your customary marriage, you are still married, because non-registration does not invalidate your marriage. So you must understand that you are married. So when you separate with the intention of not coming back together, you must understand you need to divorce. So you need to go through the process of divorce. And because if you have performed the requirements of a customary marriage, and just because you didn't register them in the court, it does not mean that you're not married. And therefore, if you divorce, you must divorce according to formal process, which means you must approach the court for divorce. And if you don't do that, then she can still make a claim as her spouse, as the husband, for maintenance. And because you still are married, you see. And this is what a lot of things Amajita don't understand, is that non-registration doesn't mean Horelia John. And you want to come and people take this point of, no, it's fine, Ria Joel. It's been 2 years. I haven't seen her for 2 years. I haven't seen her for 6 months. She's been away for what? I've got another woman in the house here. If that ever is the case, the problem is you are still married in terms of law. And if at any point in time he or she takes that to court, she will have the evidence to show that you're married.
Okay. Now, when you say that, I'm seeing this comment here from Dedis Boo, who says, once there's a celebration, what I know is if you had a celebration after your lobola and there were witnesses, you are married and in community of property. But now that in community of property bit could have been sort of overridden had you had gone out and had a contract drawn up first, right? Dedilwazi? Or is that the one where you were saying, Dedilwazi, that after the traditional wedding and all that, you have 3 months to actually go to the court to register it, be it as a contract, as an in community of property contract or an out of community of property contract? I would like you, Dedilwazi, to add on to that. Are you still with us?
Yeah,
you can add on to it.
Quite correctly so, to say that would be the safest, is that before going into the negotiations, you must have your contract sorted out if you are going out of community of property. Obviously, if you're going in community of property, you are fine. You don't need to have any other contract and so forth. After the fact of the lokobola negotiations, it's quite prudent that you do not wait for the wedding. And this is the important part, where we wait 10 years until we get enough money. Don't wait. That you need to register whatever type of marriage that you are entering into. Be it a civil or customary, you need to register it. Without that registration, that's where confusion starts happening, right? And what then tends to happen, and I was reading a case where both parties actually separated a long time ago. Both parties moved on, and after moving on, were subsequently married to other people, right? The wife is married to another person, the husband is married. Then one of the guys passes on. Then that lady who's gone goes back to the family and said, "Hey, I'm actually a wife here."
Well, you know what? That is very funny, because she is right.
Yes.
Because the marriage she had with you nullified the second one that she went into.
Exactly. It nullified both their marriage, and she had a claim on a 4 million rand estate of the guy who passed on. So what we are saying is that even though, like I said, you've put in 1,000 rand, you then was there, maybe there, you exchanged some gifts and so forth, and you saw yourself as not actually concluded the process because maybe you didn't finish, or maybe you didn't finish 1 or 2. She didn't come to your house where you moved her from her house and you welcomed her. That didn't happen. So according to you, you were like, I'm not married. But if that person goes to court today, they will have a claim and so forth. And the lady actually had a claim to being the spouse of the guy, and was able to access some of the guy's estate after so many years of them not being together and having married with children with another person. So those are the realities that we sit. Yeah. So those are the realities we sit with, that we need to ensure. Yeah.
I wish we had more time. I mean, we just have about 4 minutes to go. But, Daddy, you have daughters, right? And a son, right?
Yes.
What would be, based on your experiences, what would be a message to your son right now if he was listening, just in a minute, as far as marriage and commitment is concerned?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously he needs to be ready for such a step. He needs to be committed to such a step, firstly. And then obviously we'll then have the discussions. These are the effects. The fact is the matter, there's 4 types of contracts. You need to make sure that you choose the one that you guys will suit you guys. And once they've chosen, they need to then be protected according to that contract. And then make sure that once the contract is in place, then we can start the process. Then we can send the letter. Then we can, because everything is clear. Should things go well, should things go badly, should whatever happen, everybody's clear into what they're entering. A lot of us men are afraid to actually enter into this discussion. You might have a preference to say, I want out of community of property. Now the question is, how do I tell her that, and so forth and so forth. So if that is your intention, you got to be clear on it, because you will find that all these marital laws, when I speak to lawyers and so forth, they'll tell you your civil law, be it in community or out of community of property, is there to protect women in a sense. The civil law was to protect white women in the previous regime against husbands, because the husbands would make sure that they are housewives and so forth. And then the out of community of property was also to actually protect the white women as well, because obviously she might have inherited something from her father which she doesn't want to share. So then you'll have a situation where she needs that protection. So that's how the out of community of property came along. And then obviously now with the customary law, the customary law originally was there to before it was recognized. It was there mainly for the family protection, but right now how it is being structured is there to protect women as well today. To say that you because remember previously the customary law didn't allow a woman to own a property, was not allowed to have succession, husband's wealth and so forth. So they've brought in all of those to make sure that there is protection of women, not necessarily the protection of men. So that is why I say that as a man, you got to be clear up front. You got to be clear
very
up
much
front.
so, right?
This is
very
what I want.
So.
You take it or you don't, and then you.
Okay.
Then yeah.
So would you say that then your role as a father, my role as a father, to both the son and the daughter, would be to actually, with the understanding that they might not be willing to engage in that communication, to actually sit them down, whether before or even at the point where they say they're getting married? Would you say then that would be the best way to remedy that?
Most definitely, you gotta have an understanding of where they are, both of them, and both people needs to have an understanding, an agreement of that particular decision. It's very important.
Absolutely.
That they both buy into it from there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Daddy. Much appreciated. Thank you for being part of this conversation. We are gonna bring it back even beyond the SA Marriage Week. And thank Daddy Lwazi. Unfortunately, he's dropped off. And thank you for every single one who joined us today. All the comments, we appreciate them. All the support. Remember, at the end of the day, it takes a village to raise a child. And that child turns out to be a husband, turns out to be a wife tomorrow. So it is us who have that responsibility, be it as an uncle, be it as an aunt, to say, when your child comes and says, this is what's happening, this is what needs to happen, this is what I want to see happen, you need to be in the position to can say, come sit here, buy me one ngutu, or pour me a cup of coffee, and let's have this conversation. So thank you very much, Daddy. And thank you everyone for joining in today. And we appreciate you. Let us get together tomorrow and discuss further. Tomorrow we're gonna be unbundling issues and the challenges that might happen, and unbundling issues of ubumnandi in marriages. So thank you very much and have an awesome afternoon. And remember, you can always go back to this recording and view it on our YouTube channel, on our Facebook page. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.